I argue in the article that providing oversight of compliance is increasingly being accepted as part of the overall responsibility of oversight of today's boards. And what this means is that the members of the board need to have skill sets to cover this area. And yet, many board members really aren't quite sure what this means practically for them. What skills and what exactly? Particularly unclear to them is whether and how they're supposed to interact with the head of the compliance functions, the Chief Compliance Officer. Well, it can be a problem as there can be considerable downside. If the company were to suffer, for example, a compliance failure, there could be exposure for the board if it were shown that it was not providing effective oversight on compliance. Imagine, if you will, a regulator or prosecutor asking the chairman of the board how many times he or she met with the chief compliance officer in the past year, or what resources the company is spending on compliance. And imagine that chair not being able to answer adequately the question. But there can also be an upside. Yes, and I often call this the opportunity side. It's been long known, and it's often mentioned, that a good compliance approach can also help a company build a healthier culture. But in today's world, we have new examples and new challenges. With the increasing concern with climate change, for example, the ESG area is emerging: environment, society, and governance. This is a complex topic, but what is clear is that it needs concrete proof points. It can't simply be a slogan. For example, it's one thing for a company to claim that it follows ethical conduct as regards its customers and business practices, or that it observes environmental regulations. But it's quite another thing to be able to demonstrate to stakeholders that the company has, in fact, specific mechanisms, including an independent compliance function, to responsibly drive the agenda and ensure the accuracy of these claims. And it's even more persuasive when it can be shown that the board is actively involved in providing oversight of these efforts. Well, this is due to several reasons. For one, boards do not always get the right information on compliance. In trainings of board of directors that I hold around the world, I'm often told that the board is not getting, in some instances, even basic information, such as what is the spending on compliance, or what are the metrics that the compliance function is using to measure effectiveness. But even more unsettling is that some boards are unable to articulate the compliance strategy. What are the aims of the compliance program at their company? What are their long-term goals? Some boards are just not demanding or receiving information about such strategy. And yet, there is another factor. You see, many board members grew up knowing about the legal department or law department, and they have interacted regularly with the general counsel. But a compliance function or a chief compliance officer, well, that's still something quite new to many of them. Thus, when the company does have a true chief compliance officer, someone independent from the general counsel, many boards are unsure how to deal with them. It's important not to think that the problem lies only with the board. You see, in some companies, management has failed to properly position the chief compliance officer role such as that by not making it sufficiently senior or by conceiving it more as a technical rather than a leadership role. In such a case, it means that the chief compliance officer position does not come within the radar of the board. They do not see it in that circumstance as one of those positions, unlike the CFO, where the board says, yeah, we need to have a good command of what this person does and how good he or she is. In the article, I offer 6 main tips for how boards could step up their game on compliance oversight and improve their supervision and engagement with the chief compliance officer. In the article, I detail the tips, but allow me to share 3 here. First, the board should see their responsibility on compliance as a duty of inquiry and of attention. This means being attentive to all the possible ethical or compliance risks that could arise within the company, including within the management team and including within the board. Second, the board should demand a strategy. Like any other area of corporate activity, the work on compliance cannot simply be a series of activities. It requires a strategy, and indeed a board-approved strategy. Third, the board should not let management shape the relationship of the board with the chief compliance officer. The board owns its duty of oversight, so it's essential for it and not management to shape that relationship with the chief compliance officer. This might include, for example, the board determining how often it wishes for the compliance officer to present to the board, but even also whether the board wishes to meet with the chief compliance officer in between meetings. In the article, I explain the benefits of having meetings of the board with the chief compliance officer without management being present. That's an easy one. The board should not wait for a crisis to start. In the article, I describe a number of to-dos that emerge from some of the observations we've discussed today. And obviously, it is much better to pursue these to-dos before a crisis arises. We have learned from many corporate failures, including recent major ones, both in Europe and in the US, why the argument that things don't look so bad at our company or we haven't had any major problems, why that argument is not a winning strategy and involves a great deal of risk, given that what is at stake is the reputation and the long-term success of the company.